Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here going to Limyra today. I want to say thank you as well to Anka Dan for inviting me and Friederike to speak here this afternoon. As she already said, we're going to talk about a city in Lycia in southwestern Asia Minor, which is called Limyra. In the first part, I'm going to show you about the development, the monumental buildings from various periods, and in the second part, after this long introduction, I'm gonna show you and talk about the new excavations, the new projects we are doing at the very moment. So to start with, Lycia is situated, as I said, in southwestern Asia Minor. It's a peninsula between two cities. I marked them with a yellow arrow. The ancient city of Telmessos, nowadays Fethiye, is the western border, and the eastern border, which is not indicated here in this map, but I marked it, is the large city of Antityre. And in the eastern part of this peninsula, Limyra is located. I've marked it here with the red arrow. To show you an aerial view, Limyra is like many classical Lycian cities. Limyra as well is situated directly between the coastal area, which is a flat area between two rivers. One river that comes from Arikanda, the so-called Aikerchai, and the second one, another larger river system, Alakerchai. So these two rivers form this huge coastal plain between the modern towns of Finike here and Kumlucha, which is a larger town here at the eastern part of this peninsula. As I said, Limyra is located directly between the coastal area and the mountain hill, which is located directly behind it. You'll see, if I show you the next pictures right now, two views from the modern town of Finike, that the Acropolis, I marked it here with the red arrow, maybe this is a bit closer. This is the Acropolis, situated on the last part of the mountain, which you can see in the left picture, the Tochakta, which reaches an altitude of about 1,200 meters. Limyra itself, while we do not know much about the origins, it's already been mentioned in Hittite texts of the 2nd millennium BC. The first archaeological find, pottery, goes back to around 700 BC, and the first architectural remains, walls, houses, date back to the Archaic period. That means that a settlement, we can prove a settlement at least from, let's say, around 600, 550 BC onwards. In the next slide, I showed you silver coins of a man called Perikle, and the history and the first heyday of Limyra is closely connected with this guy. He was a local dynasty, a local potentate, who managed to subdue, to conquer the whole peninsula. Until his life, which was around, let's say, 380, 360, the capital of Lycia was the famous Xanthos, of course, in the western part of this area. But Perikle, as I said, managed to conquer the whole peninsula and made himself Basileus Lycion. That means, of course, king of the Lycians. And he made Limyra a capital. That means that the first heyday of this city is around 300, or started, let's say, around 380, with the extension, with the enlargement from an unimportant village, little town, to the capital of the Lycian cultural landscape. As I said in the beginning, the city is mainly divided in two parts. We have here in the northern part, you see, this is a steep slope I could show you with massive defensive walls. I'm going to show you one or two pictures. You see the southern borderline here, then it's interrupted. Unfortunately, there are no remains of this defensive line here, but here in the western city, we have another, even if scarce remains of these fortification walls. In Hellenistic times, the city was enlarged to the south. I'm going to talk about that. And then, well, we do not have any defensive walls, no fortification walls in the Roman Imperial period, but you can see, well, the city was enlarged. You see some buildings here in the western city, such as the cenotaph, the false tomb of Gaius Caesar, and other buildings as well. And then, and I'm going to talk about these walls as well, in Byzantine times, the city again was fortified with 2 circles of massive defensive walls. On the Acropolis, King Perikle had a heroon, a tomb erected for himself, and this tomb was the starting point, let's say, for the excavations in Limyra. It was detected by a young German archaeologist, Jürgen Borchardt, who made a journey through Lycia, went up to the hill, found it, and was impressed by this building, so that he asked for the permission for an excavation, which he was given in 1969. Well, these 2 pictures show you the excavation of this building and the situation directly after that. In the background, you can see the shoreline. You see that the distance to the seas varies, is not really huge. It's just approximately 4 kilometers. You also see that there are not many remains in situ, and this is due to all the buildings in Lycia. You must not forget that we are close to the coastal line. All this southwestern Asia Minor is a very active earthquake zone. So this is one of the reasons why many of the buildings got damaged throughout the time. And the second reason for that, I'm going to tell you rather at the end of this presentation. Anyway, with the heroon of Perikle, there were stones and remains enough in order to make a reconstruction. As I show you here, this is a drawing of the architecture and the sculpture, but there was also enough to make a model which was done or made in the early 1990s for an exhibition which took place in Austria. You see the tomb itself takes the form or the shape of a Greek temple of an amphiprostylos, but instead using columns, Perikle used caryatids. Well, and this is, of course, a kind of program. You have to see that the dynasty calls himself Perikle. He must not be, of course, confused with the Athenian statesman, but he, without any doubt, was the model that Perikle gave himself this name. Maybe he was a large or big admirer. And the model for the caryatids, I think they don't need any explanation, as together with the name of Perikle, it's most obvious that it's the caryatids on the north, on the south side of the Erected. But it's not only the caryatids, but rather the shape, the form of the temple as well, because this is another indication for another building of the Athenian Acropolis, as the temple of Athena Nike had the same form, the form of an amphiprostylos. So we see huge Greek influences on this building, all the more as the acroteres. There's 2 acroteres. One, I don't show you in detail, that shows the Greek hero Perseus killing the Medusa. And the second thing, the second acrotere here on the south side, this is the Greek hero Bellerophon killing the Chimera in Lycia, and according, and that's another striking parallel with the temple of Athena Nike, according to an inscription, this temple in Athens had the same subject as one of its acroteres. So it is also the display of Bellerophon who killed the Chimera. Maybe you know Bellerophon was a young prince from Corinth who had to leave the country, came to Lycia, where he was ordered to fulfill a few deeds. Everybody hoped that he would die with trying to make these deeds, but he subdued and he overcame a few persons, and also this monster of the Himyra, and therefore became one of the founder fathers of Lycia, of this cultural landscape. So there are, again, of course, close connections between Athens and Lycia. This is striking that at this time, at the beginning of the 4th century, Lycia was part of the Persian, of the Achaemenid Empire, not of the Greek realm. Lycia belonged to the Attic Hellenistic League only for a couple of decades, 20, 30 years at the beginning of the 5th century. Another, I think, when we go once back, you see that part of the sculptural decoration, we have the caryatids, we have the acropolis, and we have 2 friezes alongside the cellar walls. These friezes show a procession of foot soldiers, of riders, and even of a chariot with his most important person who is going to ascend this chariot. Well, we can only suppose, but it's the most plausible hypothesis that we have to see the owner of the tomb, Perikle, within this person. Parts of the west frieze were found. Well, this is a reconstruction, of course. In the upper row, there are the remains which were found in the course of the excavations. In the lower row, there is the reconstruction. And the same is due to the east frieze, which at the beginning had just very scarce finds. Most of this frieze were lost, but with a beautiful coincidence, in the 1990s, another part of this frieze was found, so that the reconstruction can be made, and it's obvious that it's nearly the same depiction as the west frieze, showing Perikle as the head of his army, maybe going into a war, or it's just a procession to show the power of the army of Limyra. Once again, I show you both friezes here in this picture. Anyway, it's not only Greek influence that I showed you right before, as especially the friezes. This is said because of certain reasons. I don't want to go into Oriental models for that. And you can also see this high podium. The amphiprostylos, the temple is standing on a high podium. This has to be seen as an indigenous, as an autochthonous element, because these large tombs of dynasts go back to the model, to the first type of dynastic tombs, which were these famous Lycian pillar tombs. That means that the tomb owner always wanted to be buried in a high altitude. So here on this tomb at the heroon of Perikle here in Limyra, we have the 3 elements: an Lycian autochthonous element with a high podium, Greek architecture and partly Greek influence in the sculpture, and Oriental models in the frieze. Anyway, Perikle did not only, or has not only his own tomb made, but as I said, he fortified the whole city. You can see the immense fortification walls. Here on the right side, you see parts of the Acropolis, and I show you here, yeah, unfortunately collapsed somewhere, but just to give you an impression of the power and the strength of the walls here, part of the North Bastion here on the northern part of the Acropolis. As I said before, the south wall is not, well, the state of preservation is really not good due to a few facts. As I said, earthquakes, and the second thing is that in the 1950s, there was a modern village which was built directly above the ruins of Limyra, and of course the farmers were not very happy when they wanted to construct fields when there were defensive walls here, so they were torn down. in the 1950s and early 1960s. And that's the reason why the walls are we just have few parts, very few parts of this defensive wall. Another thing here in the western city, but also scarce remains of the southern wall there and the south gate, which was leading from the south into the area of the fortified city of Limyra. Perikle also enlarged the residential area. Well, we have my forerunner as the director of the excavation, Thomas Marksteiner, made some excavations here in this area, and he found all the walls and all the buildings. I said that the oldest ones were from archaic period, but we also have early classical remains of the settlement, very scarce remains, but we see together with the stratigraphy and the finds that there must have been a settlement from the 6th century onwards, 6th century BC onwards. But anyway, in the beginning of the 4th century, when Limyra was made the capital, the settlement was enlarged up to the rocky, steep slope of the hill which leads up to the Acropolis. I just show you a few impressions. You can see that it's not much that has been preserved because we have to imagine that the houses were cut into the bedrock, and in the front and partly in the sides, there were also walls erected. Anyway, the walls have all been, without any exception, been torn down. All that remains are the parts which were hewn into this bedrock. You can also see how steep this slope really is. The distances from south to north, of course, for overcoming these things, stairs had to be built, and you can imagine that there was a huge erosion as well that really destroyed the houses to a great deal. I myself, when I was a student and young archaeologist, I did the excavation there in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and sometimes I really was desperate because we were digging up to 10, 15, 20 days, and all we find was sometimes was the naked bedrock. So this is one of the problems being an archaeologist in Limyra anyway. This steep area it was also a problem for the engineers and for the architects to build houses there, but you also have to imagine that it was a very difficult task to drain the water off. Maybe you know that even in that time, in the classical time, especially in winter, let's say late autumn, winter, early spring, heavy rainfalls were falling. It's the same until nowadays. And you can also see that this local limestone doesn't have a really good quality. There are cracks, there are holes. That means that the water which came with the immense rainfalls, of course, there was the danger that it was coming through the rock. That means that huge and really immense sewers, water draining channels had to be cut into the bedrock. And this is the reason why I want to show you this picture. Here we have, this picture shows the excavation somewhere in the late 1980s, but I think you can see this water channel here coming down. This is the same thing, so it went down to, let's say, 3.5 meters somewhere here, just in order to drain the water off, in order not to expose houses too much to the rainwater. Now we have the plan of this residential area, of part of the residential area of the houses. But as I said, the state of preservation again is very poor, so that we cannot even say in all cases, say if every single room built a house on its own, or if there are connection between terraces. It's really difficult to make a statement here. Anyway, the finds we have there, mainly pottery, of course, glass, coins, and things of daily life, they date back to the beginning of the 4th century. And we know that these houses were, people lived there throughout decades, throughout centuries. The latest finds date back to the Byzantine era. Of course, wherever people are living, they have to be buried as well. And Limyra has, quite a great deal of graveyards, of necropoles. I just want to show you a few pictures of the two necropoles, which were called Necropole 2 and 3, because they are directly besides the city walls. The second necropolis directly to the west, and the third necropolis directly to the east of the city wall. In this picture, I show you one of these typical Lycian house tombs. They reflect the contemporanean house architecture, well, at least according to the most widespread hypothesis. And this tomb is one of the beautiful, it's one of the important, let's say, tombs, because it doesn't only have architecture, but was also equipped with a relief and one of the Lycian inscriptions. You don't see this inscription quite well, but in Limyra we have approximately 60, let's say, tomb inscriptions in the Lycian language. This is by far the greatest number of all Lycian inscriptions of a single Lycian city. And I showed you this relief, this tomb of the name is not completely preserved. It's just Uvata, but we can, according to parallels, we can guess that this man who was buried here together with his family, that his name was either Muvata or Huvata. And the relief to the right side of the tomb shows him overcoming an enemy. And this is a citation again, which shows close parallels or close, let's say, influence to Greece and to Athens, as at the inner side of the shield of the Athena Parthenos, you see the exact model for this duel, for this single combat. Yeah, so again, a citation of a Athenian, of a Greek illustrator. Another tomb, one of the freestanding tombs here, the tomb of Huniae on the top of this necropolis, again with the grave chamber and the longer Lycian inscription. And well, according to the second necropolis, it's the third necropolis here, which is outside the city walls from here, and the southern part of the defensive walls, with one exception. There's one huge tomb, a sarcophagus of a man called Chintabura, and this is an exception so far as it seems to be, or it is an intramural tomb. That means this tomb was standing directly in midst of the residential area. It's one of the largest sarcophagi in Lycia, by far the largest one in Limyra, at least which is preserved, and it's adorned, equipped over and over with reliefs showing various deeds, various scenes of the life of Chintabura, and therefore, of course, it's one of the landmarks of the city. According to the reliefs, according to the inscriptions, the datation is approximately at the time of Perikle. That means around let's say it's between 380 and 360 BC. Yeah, I'm leaving, at least for the moment, the classical period, and want to show you one of the huge monuments of the Hellenistic period, here marked with an arrow in the directly below the Byzantine city wall. This city wall, you can see it here, you can see it here. This was built some 1,000 years after this large building. And with the two right pictures, I show you the situation before the excavation, somewhere in the early 1980s, and then again at the end of the excavation, some 20 years later. And you again see that it's not much preserved in situ, but we have more than 1,000 blocks, architectural blocks, columns, statues, sculptural ornamentation, structural ornamentation, so that we again can exactly if, or we have an exact picture how this temple, how this building looked like. The model on the right side here is, well, that's a bit an old thing. As I said, that it was it was made somewhere in the 1990s. Now you see there's another roof, another form of the roof. This roof, in the meantime, it has proven that this form of the roof is the true one. It is a building which was, well, it can be dated approximately to the first half of the 3rd century BC, most probably between 280 and 265. That means the reign of Ptolemy II. After Alexander the Great died, the Ptolemies, who had their newly built capital in Alexandria, but I'm going to talk about that a bit later, they also conquered Lycia because it was very important to have a base which is at the southwestern shoreline of Asia Minor and equipped with strong and beautiful harbors. So the building was built in this period, earlier 3rd century BC. Consists of 3 parts: podium, which is a rectangular, massive podium. Then there's a round building, a polos, standing in front of it, and the roof here with a monumental acroteer, as built as a Corinthian capital. The roof was supported by 18 columns following the Ionian form. Yes, the Ionian form, 18 columns altogether. You can see at first glance that this building also was one of the most prominent and most magnificent buildings here, not only in Lycia, but in whole Asia Minor. And we are quite sure that the dynasty of the Ptolemies has it erected by themselves, at least paid the money, because Limyra would never have been able to pay the money in order to erect such a huge and magnificent building. The cellar here inside was adorned, surrounded with a frieze of a chariot race. On the corners, you see there were, each corner there were 2 lions. One of them was found, even the head was found, fortunately. And at least at the western side, this side here, we can see there we have a few metopes showing the subject, the theme of a Kentauromachy. You can see, I think it's a very strange style. There are no parallels. It's really, it's a strange thing, but you can see at first sight that the quality is superior. And this is valid also for the structural ornamentation. As you can see, the part of the Ionic capital, or here, this part of this is the lower part of the gaison here. Well, there was, of course, the question for a long time, why did the Ptolemies make this building? Why is it standing in Limyra? And what is the reason for this building? What's the destination of this building? So there were 2 ideas. The first one, of course, it might be a tomb building, but due to various reasons, the excavator, Mr. Borchardt, and the architect, Mr. Stanzel from Mainz in Germany, got the idea that it's rather a temple than a tomb building, because no chamber, no opening was found, neither in the podium nor in the cellar itself. Instead of that, parts of statues were found, which I show you here on the right side. While in the center, a female statue with a head, with a height of, it was a bit over life-sized, as it is here, approximately, I don't know the exact dimension, but it's around 2.5 meters without head. And the head on the right side, you can see here, excuse me, here there was the room, there was another inlay, maybe we do not know, of bronze or might be even gold, of the diadema basilicon, that means of the royal diadem. according to the specialist in Hellenistic sculpture, is going to publish this, Anastasio Pecrido from Frankfurt. This portrait should show Ptolemy III. And, well, the official hypothesis is, and will be published like this, that this building is a temple for the ruler's cult of the dynasty of the Ptolemies here in Lycia. Well, we know a few parallels of Ptolemaion all over the Greek world, but we also know that the Ptolemies played an important role in Lycia. But I come back to this. They played a very important role with enlargement, with reorganizations, with a blossoming building period here in the 3rd century BC. Ptolemaion. There's a third building here in Limyra, which belongs to the really large and magnificent buildings, although you can see it's just a block, solid block in the middle of nowhere here close to the center of the western city. Well, at first view, it does not look like a building because it's really a massive block of opus cementitium. But anyway, this block was clad with architecture. You see, again, it's to a great part, it's destroyed. I'm going to show you the reason at the end of this presentation why this, especially this one, was destroyed very closely. But you can also see Mr. Borchardt did some excavations there in the early 1980s, and he found, especially to the north side of this building, he found magnificent parts of relief friezes and sculptures, such as this horse head here. You can see the veins and everything. It's extraordinary work. And also this part of a male head with this mustache here. Or fragment of a relief and this block with structural ornamentation. Looking at these finds, Borchardt decided that well, for him it was obvious that it was early Roman and it should be from the era of Augustus, first emperor of the Roman Imperium. And by chance, as he always said, he got a notice. He was reading Cassius Dio, and Cassius Dio wrote that by chance or by incidence, the grandson and adopted son of Augustus, whom he wanted to have as his successor as the emperor of the Roman Imperium, Gaius Caesar, died in Limyra in the year 4 after Christ, 4 AD in February, coming back from a diplomatic mission from the eastern provinces. And the idea was that Augustus made or has a cenotaph, a false tomb made at the place where his beloved grandson died. There was an excavation took place, and again there were, except of the roof, you see it's marked, well, not very strongly, but all, in general lines, we can also reconstruct this building. That means that in the center, at the nucleus, was this opus cementitium block, and this was clad all over with magnificent architecture. And on the bottom of the building, there was a frieze running alongside the whole building on all 4 sides, showing the deeds and scenes of the life of Gaius Caesar. In the early 90s, let's say 1980s until the 1990s, the idea of Borchardt of the cenotaph, well, to be honest, nobody believed him. They were all smiling and said, why should Augustus build a cenotaph for Gaius Caesar in a modest town or city of Limyra? But by chance, it was really by chance, this find one of the most magnificent relief parts we really know from the Augustan epoch, from this period, well, brought a changing in the thinking. I don't know if anybody of you has ever been to Antalya, to the museum. It's an exhibition there, and it's really one well, let's say an extraordinary part of work. You can see even the inside of the horses here, the eyes and all the things which have to, I don't know the English expression for this, Hügel and Trense, but they're all worked incredibly carefully and incredibly beautifully. The stone is marble. We've just proven a couple of years ago, together with a colleague from Austria, that this marble was coming from a stone break in Aphrodisias in Caria. And just a couple of years ago, we found, again by chance, a ranked pillar, which again, I think you can see the first sight is a masterpiece on its own, showing not only these ranks, but also an eagle here and a lizard. It's exactly here at this point. Just to point out these animals and the ranks as well to the Aurea Aetas, which was one of the highlights, or let's say in propaganda, of Augustus' early Roman imperial period. And also the pillar fits perfectly to the reconstruction of Joachim Ganser, the architect who published this building, as it's a corner pillar and it would find a fine place exactly at this position. So these were the three large monuments here I wanted to show you, together with the houses and the development of the city according to the monuments. Now I want, in the second part, I want to show you what we are doing at the moment, and that means the projects that are going on, have been going on during the last years. This picture, I show you the plan of the lower city. I marked the classical city walls, the southern city wall, here with these arrows. And just a couple of years ago, we made an excavation very close to the western gate here in the Byzantine city wall. You can see the gate here. And we found, of course, as was to be expected, a street that was leading inside the city. We found adjacent neighboring architecture. Most of the stuff, of course, as you can see, Byzantine, or the street is Roman Imperial, well, let's say Roman Imperial period or late antique. Anyway, but one thing we found really took us with surprise. It's this row of blocks here in a depth of approximately 2.5 meters. It was, I don't remember quite well, 3 or 4 blocks we found, or even 5, which apparently were not Byzantine, of course, and not Roman Imperial period. According to my hypothesis I had from the very beginning on, they should be, well, let's say, I hope that I published it as well, they should be Hellenistic. And this hypothesis proved to be true. We have, again, here a part of the of this wall with a tower. It's this wall here in the real and the tower. And it's crazy, not crazy, but it's astonishing that just marked with a red line, I marked the direction of this wall. Well, roughly, let's say from northwest to southeast. I have the next picture here. Yes, it's 2 pictures from the south towards this wall. And for me, it was clear that it's a defensive wall. And it was also clear that it must have been a Hellenistic, well, that it dated to the Hellenistic period. This is, on the one hand, according to the form of the blocks and the building technique with its runners and binders. And the second proof was the material we found in the foundations. It means mainly here, but also on other places. This is the last, the deepest row. Below that, there are the foundations. We found pottery as well, the local pottery or the regional pottery, the Lycian one, as well as imports from Attica. And, well, let's say approximately 99 or 95%, well, that means at least by far the vast majority was pottery of the late 4th, that means late classical period. There were a few pieces very early pottery. So we can assume that not only according to the building technique, but also to the finds. This must be a fortification wall, which must have been made somewhere in the 3rd century BC. When I go back once, according to my idea, which I have not was not able to prove for 100%, but it's the most plausible hypothesis and explanation. In Hellenistic period, the city of Limyra was enlarged to the south. This is the classical wall. Here it's just an enlargement of, let's say, some 80 meters, which is not far. But in the east, the enlargement takes place for about, let's say, 250 to 300 meters. So it was an enlargement, and this is due, or it's valid, that happens in many cities, not only in Lycia, that the classical cities were enlarged, and people used from the very beginning a rectangular street grid, and it was really with streets with squares. It was a planned city, and that's in contrast to the classical cities here in Lycia, which were, let's say, following the landscape and where there was no uniform street grid within the city plan. Yeah, I said before that Lycia was an important part of Asia Minor for the Ptolemies. That's the reason why I show you this map of the Eastern Mediterranean. Lycia, we are here, in Antalya and Fethiye, here, this peninsula. And you can imagine that it's not only the trade from Greece to the Levant, which was done most times by ship. So people, of course, needed the shorelines, needed harbors where they could put some water into the ships, where they could make the trades, take new goods on ship, do the trading, the selling, and so on and so on. And Lycia, also Cilicia, but also Lycia was equipped with a few very important harbors, such as close to Xanthus and Patara here in the western part. There was Andriake here in the central part, and of course Finike, Phoenicus, another harbor here which is very close to Limyra here in the eastern part. So this is the one reason why Lycia was important for the Ptolemies. And the second, of course, you can see that from the southernmost point, you have the shortest direction. This is exactly to the opposite of Alexandria. And accordingly, Ptolemy the first, after having become, after having created his new capital, Alexandria, and become king of the Ptolemaion realm, tried successfully to conquer Lycia, which must have happened somewhere around 300 BC, and for approximately 100 years, until 197, the whole peninsula was under Ptolemaion rule. And as I said before, as I just pointed out, this was one of the successful of the better periods here of Lycia in the Hellenistic period. We know that at least the city of Patara was completely reorganized. Ptolemy II called the city Arsinoe after his wife. And it seems, although, well, I show you this city wall of Patara, which was dated until the early Hellenistic period, until recently. Now the Turkish excavators want to date it back to the late classical period. I'm a bit skeptical about that anyway, because it shows some typical features for Hellenistic city walls according to my ideas. And the second thing the Ptolemies did, of course, was I just noticed that Jacques joined the session now. Hi, Jacques. I think you know this place quite well. I don't know whether Laurence is also here. Anyway, in the Ptolemaion period, the cult with the three temples of Leto, Apollon, and Artemis was completely reorganized, and the three temples, you see them here in the rear, in the center, and here they were completely newly built. So cults, religion, cities, temples reached a new highlight, a new heyday here in this period. Unfortunately, it's not too much, it's not preserved too much of this period, because most of the parts in the cities were overbuilt in the Roman Imperial period, especially in the period of Hadrian, of course. Anyway, we see Limyra is one of the cities where we can fulfill this enlargement, and we are trying to find ideas whether we can fulfill or find parts of the street grid of the city area in the Hellenistic time, which is very difficult though to make it in Limyra. Anyway, we're doing our best. But one thing we could find out, we learned, you see, again, I want to point out to the orientation of the city wall here. This roughly northwest southeastern direction seems that this became normal, and it became valid not only during the Hellenistic period, that even later buildings followed this direction. As you can see, not only by the plan here, this is the Roman Imperial street, and even the Byzantine walls, they're following the same direction. But in this plan, which also shows the results of the ground penetrating radar, which I will talk about in a very short time. Anyway, you see that the Roman imperial buildings, the monumental buildings, such as the theater, the baths, even the bishop's church in Limyra. I'm sure there was an older building below this church. The cenotaph of Gaius Caesar and another building. They followed the same direction. You can see this also that on the north side here in the eastern city, these buildings, they all have the same directions, roughly, as I said, from northwest to southeast. You can see it also here with, this is the extension of the Hellenistic city wall, and all these buildings here follow the same direction. An exception, and that's remarkable, is the Ptolemaion here. So we have, this does not follow this orientation, but rather the direction of the Hellenistic city wall. So the most plausible idea I have to explain this phenomenon is that the Ptolemaion was built before the reorganization and enlargement of the city of Limyra in the Hellenistic time. Anyway, we see that also there in the western city there is a shift. You see this round building, you see a street that follows this direction. We just started to excavate this, and you see that in the eastern city, at least in the southern part here, we have a large street here. I'm going to show you, and here there is a shift. These parts of the city do not follow the same orientation. A detail here so that you can fulfill it or better. This is a round building. It seems that this part, even if according to the results of the GPR, seems that this is a square and the street is leaving from here to the east. Now we know that the street, which is visible here, follows this direction until the Byzantine city wall. Unfortunately, we could not do any radar measurements there because there are at least 700 of the more than 1,000 blocks of the Ptolemaion, but we do know that the extension of the street was here, and then in this part, this area, it was shifting to the southeast. This is part of the street, and then it followed in a large arrow throughout the eastern city until the east gate. During the last decades, a few sondages have been made in order to get the way of or to find the way of the street. As I said, Limyra is a difficult place to make excavations, and this is the one thing Friederike will talk about afterwards, as the groundwater situation is, well, it's not unique, but it's challenging, let's say this way. Anyway, because you see that this part of the monumental street here is below the groundwater now, let's say about 60, 70, 80 centimeters. Anyway, you can see the pavement there. Then, just a couple of years ago, we made a second excavation here at the eastern gate, You see the view from the east to the west, that means towards the city, again with the street and a drinking water channel. But this is not the normal situation, as we were forced to work on the constant use of pumps, of course, in order to get rid of the water. Just leaving the place for one day or during night is long enough in order that the whole area fills again with water. But this groundwater might be the explanation for this partial shift of the city plan, as I said, here and this street. And maybe we have the crucial spot here in this area. It's again a hypothesis I made. I'm sure that I never can prove it, but at least it sounds, let's say, plausible. You can see that the whole area here, well, is below. Let's say the antique, the ancient structures are below the water level. You see that there is a river arm. This is the western arm of the Limyra River, and it seems that this water is relatively new. With relatively, I want to say that it's not from Neolithic times or even later, whatever. That it came into existence in the Roman Imperial period, and that you now have to imagine that the whole area, as I said, is a very active earthquake zone, and we know that to the mountains to the north or through the mountains, lots of water are coming from the north, and we have a very high groundwater level. Karstic springs are everywhere. And even talking with Helmut Böckler, Friederike Stock, and their colleagues, but also with other colleagues, geographic specialists, we know that with every earthquake, with every seismic movement, the hydrological situation might change completely. That means that after an earthquake, it's possible that new sources come out directly after from the ground, and new sources flood the whole area. And according to my idea, one of these earthquakes, due to one of these earthquakes, sources here close to the Ptolemaion came into existence, and also this river here. We have archaeological evidence marked here with these white lines. There was, or we could find, of course, not in situ, we're in Limyra again, but altogether more than 50 blocks of an honorary arch for a man called Ornimythos. Here again, you see the place where it was erected. There are many blocks of it. We found, as I said, well, architectural blocks, capitals. Here, that's striking a broken pediment, which is not an Eastern feature, but a Roman Western feature. And we found, and this is striking, the archivolt of this arch had an inscription. And according to our epigraphist, Mr. Wörle from Munich, he told us that this inscription should date around the middle of the 1st century AD. That means either in Julio-Claudian times or in Flavian times. The building and the inscription have been studied. A long article is in press now, and a colleague of mine, Ursula Quartember from Vienna, could make a reconstruction. It's nearly unique in this building with its broken pediment here, and the broken pediment and the archivolt. There is one parallel in Perikle, another arch which dates a few decades later than our arch. This is the inscription, and this is again extraordinary. You can see that the Lycians, they honored Ornimythos, the second Ornimythos, son of Meleager. They honored him with a golden wreath, not a crown, but a wreath, and with iconi, I can't read it like here. Anyway, with bronze statues, which must have stood on top of this honorary arch. And this is striking so far that the arch that's an exception. Was not, it was a votive thing for Onymitos, who is a private person in Limyra. Under normal circumstances, honorary arches are devoted either to the emperor or to the government of the Roman province. But here we have with Onymitos a private person. And this means that this guy must have had immense merits for the city. And it's interesting insofar as we know more details about his family. But not only the name of the father, we know him and the honorary arch, we know his daughter, who is called Chryso Artemus, living in the second half of the first century AD. She was not only a high priest, but she was a gymnasiarch, so she was the head of the gymnasia, and we know that he, Onymitos, and his daughter gave large amounts of money to the city. So it seems that they were one, if not even the leading family in Lycia. And the inscription and the architectural blocks, they date, well, let's say, around the middle or the earlier second half of the first century AD. My idea now is we again have the place where this honorary arch was situated. Here you see, this is the street I was showing, and this part of the street still follows the direction, the orientation of the Hellenistic enlargement of the city. As I said, from northwest to southeast. It might be that these are even the remains of the Hellenistic street. You see that they stop here, and here we have the river bank. I think I have another picture. This is the original street, and it seems that it did not stop by incident, but it had to stop because it's at least possible that somewhere in the first century AD, the river, the western arm of the Limyras River came into existence, so that it was not possible to use the street anymore. When we now look at this part, this again is the street, and then we see that exactly at the point where the arch was erected, the direction changes. You can see here there is construction work going on. It turns to the southeast, going back, yeah. And then we have the river, the shore of the river, and then this is the bridge. This is a bridge who was leading across the river, and then we have the beginning of the street. So we have the change, I marked it here in red as well. We have the changing of this orientation again. And according to my idea, it is at least thinkable or plausible that here maybe Onymitos was the one who organized and maybe financed the whole changing of the city plan with the erection of this street, the bridge, and here the Roman Imperial street to the east gate of the city. It's an idea, but it's possible. And this is one of the reasons why I asked Mr. Brückner and Friederike Stock to come to Limyra. I hoped that we could, with drillings, with geological drillings, we could get closer ideas of the datation of the river, of the sediments below it. That would give a clear indicator for the time of the coming into being of the river. But my hope was disappointed. The water is so clear, it comes out directly from the mountains, and it's running so quickly that there are no sediments. Anyway, there was one devastating earthquake in Lycia, which would fit to the datation, to the approximate datation of the honorary arch. This was in the year 68, the last reigning year of Nero, when the complete southwestern shore was devastated by an earthquake. It was Patara who was damaged severely, and other parts as well. And it might be that this earthquake in 68 was the reason why this river came into being, and which made the shifting of the orientation of the city plan. But Friederike Stock will talk about the geomorphology and the changing, the geographic changes in Limyra throughout the period after me. Well, just to go on further, I chose two places for excavation which seemed interesting to me. The first one is here. Of course, I wanted to get an idea what this round building was, getting ideas about the area here, which I thought that might be a square. And of course, I wanted to get an idea of the shifting of the system, get an idea of an approximate date, and so on and so on. That's the reason why I wanted to make an excavation here. I always thought, before we started an excavation, this round building might be a well, an nymphaeum or something like that. The truth proved to be different anyway. That's one of the surprises archaeologists have to face every now and then. And the second place was just a few meters to the west from here. You see these structures, these walls. You don't see too much of them. The results of the ground penetrating radar, these walls you see here, they are in a depth of approximately, let's say 70, 80 centimeters. I don't know exactly. If we go down to 3 meters though, you see that these walls here belong to the oldest walls, the walls who go deepest. Here, small, well, rectangular room, small tower, whatever, and there is a gap here. You see, and this made the impression to me that it might be a street, a way, and I got the idea also via comparisons in Lycia that this might be a city gate. That would make sense. We are here in this area I showed you. This is the Hellenistic city wall, and the place I showed you the structure is exactly here. So I thought this might be the city wall, so that a street, and I always thought I could see it even with the aerial photo, that the street was going through the door outside directly to the shore, to the Mediterranean shore, and to the harbor city of Perikle. This would make sense insofar as the situation of the cenotaph would be explained by that, because in that case, we have to imagine that the city wall was going approximately this direction. So the cenotaph of Gaius Caesar would have been located directly in front of the city wall, of the Hellenistic city wall, and directly to the right side of the street. That means that would have meant, or would mean, that everybody, every visitor, every whatever came from the harbor city and visited Limyra, of course, had to envisage and to look at the cenotaph of Gaius Caesar before he entered the city. Anyway, we made an excavation. This is the results after the last season in 2019. And of course, you see it's walls, walls, walls. It's a real mess, to be honest. You see, this is the Hellenistic city wall that comes here. It gets lost here. It means it makes a, well, it goes down to the south. Here it gets lost. We have a large, monumental building, or at least the foundations of the building. It's nothing preserved but the foundations, but it's clear that the Hellenistic city wall continues below these foundations as these two blocks here. They belong, again, by the same style. They are everything, they're in situ, so that it's clear that they are Hellenistic. Exactly this situation. At the moment, we can't say too much. These blocks here are in situ. These are all Hellenistic blocks reused, but you have to imagine that in this area, the place was overbuilt, was changed throughout centuries. So it seems that might be that this is a Roman Imperial building. This structure here is it's a Byzantine building. It's an installation, most probably for water. So we have to imagine that for more than 3,400 years, the area was changed, reorganized. Anyway, these two blocks, which are in situ, as I said, Hellenistic, give me, or at least have not yet killed my hope that we indeed have the opening for a city gate here. But anyway, it's still work has to be done there. We hopefully, last year we could not work in Limyra due to known reasons. We hope that we'll get the permit for next year, for 2021, and then we'll try to get out much information as we can get here. Also, not only for the development of the city in later times, but maybe also for a development in the Hellenistic period. Okay, a photo from a greater distance. I can imagine that I also already confused you with walls. I have to continue. I know it's complicated. Also for us, well, we at least have more time to think about it than you right now listening to me. Anyway, I don't want to talk about the excavation here, but you see the two immense circuits of walls. Here, the East City and the Western City. These walls were created first in the 5th century AD, in late antique period, when most of the ancient cities in Asia Minor got new fortification walls. Throughout the Roman Imperial period, as a consequence of the Pax Augusta, excuse me, Roman cities didn't have city walls, but in late antique period, it became the use that they were fortified again. And Limyra is a unique example, as it has not one wall circuit, but two of them. Most obviously, people did not want to have this western arm of the lemurs, of the water inside the, and that's might or should be the reason for the two city walls. The walls were re-fortified, strengthened, partly newly built in the 7th century. You can see here that the walls are much stronger, especially on the north side here, and also on the west side, also here in parts in the Eastern Sea. And that, of course, again had a certain reason. In 632, Islam was founded, and of course, under the caliphs, generals, armies were spread all over the realm in order to conquer new places. And also, of course, in Asia Minor, people were afraid that they would be conquered as well. And within a very short time, Limyra and other cities, but also Limyra, was refortified. You can imagine that while building a wall or walls, especially in ancient cities, there's no need to find new stone breaks and to bring stones from a few kilometers apart. But Limyra was equipped with magnificent buildings, with the Ptolemaion, with a cenotaph for Gaius Caesar, with other temples, with houses, with public buildings, and of course, like it was in other cities, or as it was in other cities as well, the old buildings were used as a stone break. A huge amount of blocks were needed in order to make these monumental, these massive city walls, and large amounts of mortar was needed, of course, in order to bind the blocks. And of course, you can imagine that it's a treasury for archaeologists when they see Byzantine city walls with all these reused blocks from older buildings here used as spolia. An impression of the mightiness, of the strength of the Limyrian city walls here. This is the western city, the part I showed you right before. The extension of this part that's exactly here at the western gate is approximately 8 to 10 meters. I don't know exactly, but it's massive walls. And here I show you a few examples with spolia, because I think it's more than 80% of these city walls consisting of spolia. You can see here the older blocks. Here, of course, you can see the part of the triglyph frieze here, but also the other blocks. And of course, I do not show you this picture because of this beautiful descriptions of the city of Limyra, but another huge block here. It's an immense block, must have been part of a monumental, most probably freestanding Lycian house tomb, was reused here in the city. Also here, these blocks, so they are all spolia. Or here in the East Gate, a relief block with a bucranion, which must have belonged to a Hellenistic temple. There are other blocks here in the southern, such as a monumental Ionian Capital, or a part of a pseudo-peripteros in the Corinthian order. Also, this kind of temple was not widespread in Asia Minor. Of course, we're not living too far from one of the most magnificent examples of this building type with the maison carrée in Nîmes. Anyway, these blocks have already, my forerunner, Thomas Markstein, made connections, close connections to friends and colleagues from Bordeaux, Jacques de Courtille and Laurence Cavalier, in order to study these blocks and to get ideas of the kind of buildings, maybe of the localization of these buildings, and so on and so on. And I want to show you one example. Well, this is, you can get an impression, this is one of the stone gardens, of the stone terraces with parts of these spolia here, which we were just laying down according to the building type. Last year, a friend of Laurence and Jacques and collaborator, a rather young colleague, Émilie Caire, has also taken part in the excavation, and she's helping now and fulfilling this project. I want to again show you this immense Ionian capital. This is 30 centimeters. You see, we are not even at the half of the block, and the voluta takes another, let's say 20, 30, let's say 20 centimeters. That means that the capital must have had, in original, must have had extensions of, let's say, between 120 and 140 centimeters. So it was a huge, it must have been a part of a monumental Ionian temple. At first, we thought that this temple was Hellenistic, according to the decoration, according to the building structures. Once again, I did not show you, just to show you the dimensions of this capital here, or two of the capitals. I show you this picture. Anyway, Laurence and another architect who was also very active in Lycia, was the director of the excavation in Les Tours for a long time, Didier Laroche from Strasbourg, were looking at the capital, and Didier found out that the dimensions, as well as the outlay, the shape, and the building technique resembles very much and very close to the Ionian capitals of the Erected. It's not only the capitals. Well, Didier, you know, architects have to draw everything, they do it magnificently, and Didier Laroche made some comparisons also of the columns of the capitals from Limyra and the Erected. But it's not only the capitals. You see the caisson, other building blocks, such as the caisson or the architrave of Limyra, resemble as well in measurements as in outlay very much the Erected in Athens. And it's striking because, as I told you at the beginning of this presentation, we have a guy in Limyra who calls himself Perikle, who has a mausoleum, a heroon built on the Acropolis, which uses caryatids, which has close resemblances to the Athenian Nike temple, and now we of a monumental temple, which seems, well, maybe not to be a copy of the Erected, but to show close parallels. Means that Athens really must have had a huge influence in Lycia, in Limyra, in the first half of the 4th century. And there was really a cultural export from Athens to Lycia in this time. Well, I want to come to the end. I just want to show you one more result coming back to the excavation here, not well, indirectly, walls again. When we studied the round building, I told you that I first thought that according to the ground penetrating radar, that it should be about an nymphaeum, a well. Well, even this is the latest situation here now after 2019, but even after the first working season, we were working 3 years here in this area, we got to know that, well, you see, it might be everything, but not a well, of course. We see that there is an entrance. We see that there is a opening, and it became clear that this opening was to fire the whole building. And according to the shape, to the dimensions, and to the finds inside, we found a massive layer of charcoal, some 15 to 20 centimeters in depth. It was clear that it's a lime kiln, which was erected in the Byzantine period in the 7th century, most probably in order to burn limestone, to burn marble in order to secure the walls and produce mortar. Yeah, I just show you one thing, just an example here. We have exactly the Luftschacht, that means the air for the fire, and then the stones were, after they were hewn into bits and pieces, they were put via the entrance into the kiln, then it was covered, and for 3, 4, 5 days it must have produced an incredible heat in order to burn the lime blocks. Last year we extended the excavation. You see here, well, this is the lime kiln, this is the entrance, and here you see all the dark areas here. That's ashes, that's coal, and we have a few pits here. I just want to show you the 2 main pits here in the north and the very close to the lime kiln, where we found dozens, hundreds of stones cut, hewn into pieces, let's say 10 to 10, 15 to 15 centimeters, like that. Of course, people took sculptures, inscriptions, building blocks from everywhere of the city. Here, this is an inscription, part of an inscription here. They hew it into small layer pieces here in this area before they were really smashed into small pieces before they could go to the lime kiln. And now one thing had become clear for us, because even the season before we found dozens of fragments of building blocks and many inscriptions as well. Well, these are Roman Imperial inscriptions, but we found even other ones. This is a Lycian, part of a Lycian inscription. That is from the 4th century AD, most probably. We found other inscriptions like this one, which can be dated not by me, but by the epigraphist Michael Wörle, well, let's say at least to the 4th century AD, because the use of P and C is a very seldom and a very late phenomenon. This block or this inscription might have been part of a sarcophagus. You see this chtoni here, so it means that it was devoted to the chtonios. That means that people took, well, of course, they did not choose which blocks they took from which building or which inscription, from all the periods, 4th century BC, 4th, 5th century AD. They took whatever they could find, smashed it, and put it into the lime kiln in order to produce mortar for the city walls. And now this explains also what the first director of the excavations, Jürgen Borchert, he had made similar experience. He found similar things very close to the cenotaph, and it's not by chance the lime kiln was made directly to the north of the cenotaph, because of course this was a magnificent building with precious marble reliefs. Marble should produce, I've heard in the meantime, the best mortar ever. So of course even the cenotaph was taken, all the blocks were taken from the monument. It was torn down, and all the pieces were smashed into pieces and brought here. You see here the northern border of the cenotaph. This building was dismantled. Things were cut here and went to the lime kiln. Well, for the classical archaeologist, it's a mess, of course, just think that, or think that pieces like this relief, where there must have been hundreds and hundreds, were all destroyed. There are other archaeologists, as my collaborator Alexandra Dolea, for instance. Hi, Alexandra, who really, of course, and it's the development of a city is a procedure. Every time it's other needs, it's other requirements. And in that time, in the Byzantine era, the reliefs were not that precious, of course. It was more important to secure the city, to protect the city before the Arab invasions. And even the classical archaeologists, and this is how I will come to an end now, well, we can be, let's say, not too sad, because we know now that after a certain metamorphosis, even pieces like this relief now survive as mortar in the Byzantine city walls. Yeah, well, I hope it was a bit long. I know it was more than 1 hour, 1:15. I hope I could show you a few interesting things, and I would like to have and invite you for a discussion. And with this, I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Continue now with the geoarchaeological part, which is much shorter, and I think I can also skip 1 to 2 slides of the introduction, as Martin already showed many nice maps and interesting pictures, so that I will directly come now to the geoarchaeological work. So we geomorphologists, we are always interested in having a closer look to the paleo environment. That means the landscape development during the last, well, let's say during the Holocene mostly, so the last 10,000 years. Actually, so the first map you see here, that's about the tectonic, because this is also quite interesting in Turkey. You have the African plate here, which is going to the north in direction of the Arabian plate, and due to that, the Aegean and Anatolian microplate has to go to the southwest, and this is why we have in Turkey many of the fault systems and grabens in the western Turkey, and here as well you see in southern Turkey, so these fault lines. Regarding the sea level or the sea depth, especially in the Mediterranean, the map on the right side is of high interest. And so the map here on the right side, there you have Turkey as well. And the area where Limyra is located, you can see that the water depth is directly very steep. So this is also of high interest regarding the sea level evolution of the last 20,000 years, which I will show now. So the shoreline during the last LGM, the last glacial maximum, that was about 20,000 years ago. And when we again go in the area of Limyra here, we see that there was not a lot of change in the last 20,000 years. This is due to the fact, as I showed on the other map here, that it's directly quite steep, and the water level is not as in the western part of Turkey flat, but yeah, you have a higher water elevation there. However, the water level and the sea level rose in the last 20,000 years of circa 120 meters until present. Regarding the geology, there we again have the Phoenicia plain, which Martin already explained, and you can see that the Phoenicia plain is dominated by Holocene and Quaternary sediments, and in the environs, the green color is mostly dominated by Mesozoic bedrock. This is now a geomorphological map of Ertuğ Öner, who already worked in Limyra, who did some geoarchaeological work, I think mostly in the 1990s. There's also a book in Turkish, which has been published by him, and he drilled all over the plain. Unfortunately, he did not analyze much of the cores. And this is why we started to take some drill cores in the plain in order to reconstruct the paleo environment, and we also dated, which is of high importance in order to know when when happened what. And I think Ertuğ Öner, he has two 14CH estimates of, I don't know, 50-60 drill cores only. So the aims of our geoarchaeological work were, on the one hand, to reconstruct the paleo environment. That means how did the river courses change? Martin already mentioned that, and he also showed the pictures where you saw that many river courses are still present today. Then another question was how far did the former lake extend? That I will show you in a moment, because under Limyra we found lake sediments, and the lake had a size of, was quite large, and was in this area here. Then another aim of the study was to study the earthquake chronology. Martin as well mentioned that already. This we tried to work on. And then another goal was to study the thickness of the settlement layers in the city in order to know when did people start to settle in Limyra, and what extension did these settlement layers had. The west and eastern city, what Martin already showed you, and some pictures of us working. So we retrieved about 35 sediment cores with the vibra of a cobra here. And we worked there 3 years, and mainly retrieved the drill cores in the western city, the eastern city, but then also some in the environs of the excavation area, in order to know how the natural environment looked like, and how the natural, let's say, without anthropogenic impact, how that developed. Those were our drill cores. So the green ones were the older ones, and the yellow ones were taken 2016, I think. So as you see, most of the cores are really located inside the city area. Here is the western city, and here the eastern part. And then we drilled 2 cores outside, close to the river here, and then close to the present shoreline. These are the cores in the city area itself, and I will now show you where we concentrated our work. So that was first here in the Episcopal Church. This is part of the eastern city, where the groundwater level is a little bit higher than in the western part. This is why it's quite complicated, first of all, to excavate, as Martin showed earlier, and also to drill, because we have this half-open drill cores. And if you have a lot of water, it's quite hard that all the sediments stay inside the cores. Then we had some drill cores here, also in the eastern city. Here, this is between the eastern and the western part. Then here, that's also at the western border of the eastern city. That was a quite interesting area, but I will come back to that later. And then in the western part, and there you can directly see that's it's not that, it's quite dry, let's say. And so we have a higher elevation of the ground, so that it was in that fact easier to drill, as the groundwater level was not that high. Regarding the drill cores in the eastern city, I will first of all show you the typical sediment sequence of Limyra. So this is a drill core of 10 meters. It starts here, that's the present surface. First meter below surface, and then you go 1 meter to 2 meters, down to 10 meters. And this is really very typical, and we had that in mostly all cores, which had a depth up to 12 meters, I think. And if we start here at the bottom, so we have this gray sediment, which is quite fine-grained, mostly dominated by silt and clay. This is the typical lake sediment. So you don't have a high energy environment, and you have so these fine-grained sediments can settle down. Then on top, we find 3 times peat layers, these mostly black layers, which are dominated by plants. In between, again, the gray lake sediments, and this is already a sign for a change of the water level, and this is most probably due to earthquakes and the subsidence of the area, so that the water depth changed, and for peat, in order that peat can develop, you need shallow water where many plants are inside, and so that the plants can develop and accumulate in this part. Then on top, just below the last peat layer, I think this is visible here on the picture as well. We have more, it's a little bit, it's not that gray, it's a little bit darker from the color. And there we have more sands. That means that's the transition from the lake to fluvial, so to a river sediment. And this continues here on top. Until the 5th meter, yeah, mostly sands, and that this shows, or this represents, one of the river channels which are still present today. And then on top here in the upper 4 meters, we have anthropogenic sediments with ceramics, bricks, and yeah, so really a lot of anthropogenic influence. And this is really when this area started to silt up and people could settle. And then on top, alluvium, this is when the city, when then people, yeah, when this city was abandoned, people did not settle there anymore, and this is like the, let's say, the natural environment or the natural sediment of the last few millennia. What we did then, we conducted geochemical and sedimentological analysis. Moreover, we dated the sediments. These are the 14C H estimates here. And we also had a closer look if we found, of microfossils. So this is always a nice indicator to say if it's freshwater sediment or if we still have an influence of marine, because then we find other species of ostracods or foraminifers. So what can we see here? First of all, this here on the right side is the facies, what I already described with the limnic peat. Then we have the fluvial, and then the entire area silted up and people started to settle, and where we have the few meter of settlement layers. We have the grain size here, and the whiter, so the gray color is a more coarse size sediment, and the black is dominated by sand. So this part here, the light gray to white one, that's clay. Then we have silt and then sand, and this is also I think very nice visible within the fluvial layers, because in the fluvial part we have this mostly dominated by sand, by a sandy layer, and this is yeah, this represents this grain size here as well. What can we say about the fluvial? The fluvial, we have a high or higher magnetical susceptibility, and this shows the transition from the limnic to the fluvial part. We also did principal component analysis of the different sediments we had. The different colors here represent the different facies layers. So the different, so the gray ones here is the fluvial samples. Then the blue ones here represent the lacustrine, and with the different symbols also represent different drill cores, but this is not of high interest now for that. The yellow one is the alluvium, and what can we read here? This is mostly the description or the analysis of the different sediments, and we see that they cluster quite well together, at least here the fluvial ones. And also in this part, there is somehow a cluster that we see that they are all dominated, for example, by high iron values or high magnetic susceptibility, or mostly sand, as this is the case for the fluvial samples here. I will continue now with the description of the different different cores in the different parts of the city. So the drill cores in the Episcopal Church in the Eastern city, where the groundwater table was a little bit higher. There we have the same sequence as in Limb 4 in the other core I just showed you earlier. So we start again with the gray limnic sediments. Then we have 3 peat layers. And then on top we have fluvial sediments, which show that the lake slowly started to silt up. The fluvial sediments were deposited, and then on top it's first swampy. That means again we have a higher groundwater level, so you could walk, but there was still some water. And then just on top we have the anthropogenic layers, where it seems to be where you could start to settle in the swampy part. I mean, you would not like to live there. And on top the peat, because we still have a high groundwater level today in this part. This is the cross-section of the 5 cores we conducted in this area. And there we also have some datings. First of all, Limb 3, what I just showed you again, this nice sequence of limnic, peat, limnic. Then we have a transition to the river channel, which came across. And then here the final part with the anthropogenic layers. Here we have 2 14CH estimates. One, the last peat layer, dated to 800 to 550 BC, and then on top another peat layer just below the anthropogenic ones, which is older. So there must be somehow, this is not possible because it's an older age, and there we would need more age estimates to say something about that. But I will come back to that later, that this age here probably is not, let's say, right, because we have in the lower peat layers, we have several age estimates which date to this period of the beginning to middle of the 1st millennium BC. If we come now to the drill cores between the eastern and the western city, again, the picture is quite similar. Again, all these peat layers, and we have the limnic sediments in all cores which were deep enough. The only difference is that the more to the west we go, we don't have peat on top because the groundwater level is not that high. But we have here represented in yellow color alluvium, so that means that's more fine-grained sediment and the water level is not that high. This is now these are now the cores between the eastern and the western city. And this was a really interesting core, that's Limb 12, especially, so at the bottom again, the same sequence as before. But the most interesting part is here, this layer in the 6 meter below the present surface, because usually we had more fine-grained sediments, so silt and clay. Now there is not only sand, but there are some stones inside. And then we had a closer look to that and found in that a layer of a depth of 30 centimeters, also flintstone, and some stones which might have been worked on by some humans. And the question is why? What is this layer doing in this area here? On top, we again have peat layers, so that means there must have been again a change of the water level. And there's one possibility, but that's really just a hypothesis and not sure at all, because it's 6 meters below the present surface and it will probably never get excavated because the groundwater level is too high. So we have a dating here, which date to about 1000 to 900 BC. And in another core, we also have 2 datings of circa 1400 to 1000 before Christ. And it might be that it was at the lake shore, and maybe there was a late Bronze Age settlement site. But this is really, as I said, just a hypothesis, and But that was quite interesting, because that was the only spot in the entire area where we found these sediments. Here in other cores as well, again, some of this, of stones, also with some interesting finds inside. In the western part now, as I said, the groundwater level is higher. We see that directly here in the pictures. So no water, no peat, no river channels as well. And there we conducted 3 drill cores, or even 5. And there are the pictures of 3 of them. And there you can clearly see the difference to the other cores I just showed you earlier. So we only find in one of the cores here, the Lim 7, which is between the eastern and the western city, the lake sediments, such as in the other ones. And in the ones in the western city, we have a lot of large core-filling limestones mostly. It's dominated here with a brown color of colluvium, so most probably slope debris, as we are closer to the foothill of the Tujak mountain. And only difference here in Lim 14, the green and the gray again, we have peat, and we also have some sands which are fluvial origin. That means here we have probably one of the river channels which was running in this part of Limyra in the western part. Again, what we did, we were in search for the Hellenistic street. That were the drill cores which Helmut Brückner conducted or retrieved in 2016. And they were also located in the western part here of this, in the western part of the western city. And there, in the first 3 meters, we find, for example, in Lim 33, piece of marble on top of horizontally layered tiles and mortar, and this might have been a substruction layer for a road. In the other cores here, there we also find in the first meter in the concentration of angular pieces of limestone, and this also the question if this was evidence for road pavement. But you never have to forget, so the cores have a diameter of 5 centimeters, so it's not very thick, and so this is always a hypothesis, but with our methods we cannot prove if this was really the case, and for that you really need an excavation. And we also found Roman pottery in the first meter, which is quite clear. The drill cores outside the city wall, they are also different. So we have Lim 13, which is has been retrieved close to the river, and Lim 20, which is close to the present coastline. So this one here, and Lim 13, so which is not that far away from Limyra, from the excavation itself. There again we find the typical sequence with limnic, so the lake and the peat, and on top fluvial sediments of sand and alluvium. And there the difference to the layers in the city is that we don't have anthropogenic influence. I mean, there is one time a pottery which we found, but that was clearly transported by the river. And close to the present shoreline, Lim 20, this one here on the lower right side, is mainly dominated by sands as well, but they are different to the ones of the river, and this was most probably a dune. And so as it's close to the shoreline, we had the dune development, and the river probably underneath. This is again the grain size, and here you can again see the fluvial part. We have way more sands, and the mean grain size is for sure also larger. The mean is a larger size than the ones below in the limnic and peaty part. I tried to create a scenario of the landscape development because I think it's always, for us, we always have a better idea. And we know after having worked there for several times and taken many drill cores, how the landscape looked like. But I think for you it's also quite, I mean, when you see the drill core and I tell you that it's a lake sediment, so it's always nice to see how the landscape might have looked like. The red points here, these are the cores by Arthur Oehner, who I mentioned earlier. And I already said at the beginning that the shoreline did not change a lot, as it's quite steep, and the water, so the water depth is directly quite high. So the present coastline is about here, so we see that it's just changed a little bit. So during the late 4th to the early 3rd millennium BC, we presume, also with the knowledge of the other cores of Arthur Oehner, that the shoreline was a little bit located more inside than it's nowadays. This is also then due to the earthquakes, probably, that we have more, that the coastline was located more inside, as the shoreline was still 1 to 2 meters lower than today, the sea level. Limyra is here, located here, and you see here, this is the lake I talked about all the time. So it was quite large, and Limyra was located really at the northern edge of the lake. During the late 3rd to early 2nd millennium BC, there you can see we have the first dunes here as well, and around at the edges of the lake, we have the peat development, which I showed you in all the drill cores. So we have 3 main peat layers, which date, I think I show that later on, but in almost every millennium, I think 4th millennium, 2nd and 1st millennium BC, we have the development of the peat. And then again, the lake sometimes was larger again, and this is as well one, this is mainly due to the earthquakes as well. If you have a subsidence of the area, for sure the water level of the lake will be higher again. So during the late 2nd millennium, we have this part here. There's more larger swampy area in the eastern part of the Friederike plain, and then during the late 1st millennium BC, the lake must have been silted up. There are several river channels running through the city itself. Sometimes you still have peaty areas, but then later on people were able to settle what you saw in the upper 4 meters or 5 meters of the drill cores. So a short conclusion. So we found this lake sediments in the subsurface strata of the city. Then we have 3 main peat layers, which dated to the middle of the 4th millennium BC, to the end of the 3rd, to the beginning of the 2nd, and to 1000 to 700 BC around. Earthquakes were there. It's a quite seismic area, as Martin also mentioned. However, we could only, with our course, we could say there were earthquakes and the lake level changed, most probably due to the co-seismic subsidence. But for this also has to be studied more in detail with other methods. And then we also had the evidence of meandering fluvial channels. That means the rivers changed their courses. This was when you compare the different the depth layers of the sandy sediments of the fluvial sediments, then you can see that there must have been a change of the river channels more to the west or to the east. And then finally, this interesting layer may be a settlement site on the lakeshore, but as I said, this is really just a hypothesis and not sure at all. I hope I could show you some of the geoarchaeology, what we did of the geoarchaeological work we conducted in Limyra. If you have any questions, you are welcome to ask. We also published an article in Geoarchaeology about Limyra. It's open access, but if you're interested, Anka, I can send you the link so that you can download the article.